Tammy, the cook, had just finished glazing the last slice of apple pie when she noticed something through the kitchen window. The wrought iron gates of the estate slowly opened, letting in a gleaming black SUV. The vehicle rolled down the gravel path that wound its way between meticulously trimmed hedges and flower beds. "The boss is back," she murmured, adjusting the scarf tied around her head. Her assistant, a young and energetic girl named Holly, quickly darted to the window. "So early. He must be planning something again. Maybe he'll want something special for dinner." "I hope so," Tammy agreed. "The pie turned out perfect today." But suddenly Holly gasped, "Oh my God, look! Who's that with him?" As soon as Mr. Andrew Carter, the estate's owner, opened the rear door of the SUV, a thin little girl stepped out. She looked to be about 10 years old. Against Mr. Carter's tailored overcoat, the child appeared almost fragile. Holly frowned. In her 2 years working in this luxurious home, she had never seen any children other than Carter's son, Samuel. "Maybe she's a relative?" she asked, glancing over at Tammy. "Can't be. I know all his family. None of them have kids that age. And Sam? You know he barely has any friends." Holly nodded silently, a strange feeling of unease beginning to settle in her chest. Meanwhile, in the driveway, Andrew knelt beside the girl. His voice was calm but clear. "So, Lizzie, what do you think of the house?" "It's like a real castle, isn't it?" The girl looked up shyly at the steep-roofed towers and the artfully sculpted weather vanes. The mansion really did resemble something out of a storybook. But the expression on Mr. Carter's face was far from fairy tale-like, stern and slightly tense. This house hadn't been built for beauty. Andrew had constructed it for his son as a way to somehow make up for the terrible tragedy their family had suffered years ago. 4 years earlier, when Sam was just 7, burglars had broken into their old home. Andrew had been away on a business trip, and they hadn't yet hired full-time security. Sam had been home with his mother. The woman managed to hide her son in the pantry, saving his life, but she didn't make it out. The intruders demanded money, beat her, and the sound of her screams still echoed in Sam's memory. Through the narrow gap of the pantry door, the boy saw them take everything valuable, saw his mother collapse to the floor and never get up again. That scene had stolen his childhood. Since then, Sam had shut down completely. He stopped walking, he stopped speaking. Medical tests revealed no physical injuries, just a severe trauma response. Andrew found the attackers quickly. Using his connections, he chose not to trust the legal system and took matters into his own hands. But even revenge didn't ease his pain. He had lost his wife. And with Sam, who had once been his greatest joy, the bond grew thinner each day. Sam barely left his room. He avoided people, and most of all, he was terrified of being alone again. Despite the efforts of the best doctors and psychologists, both in the US and abroad, the boy still used a wheelchair. Today was his birthday, 12 years old. Andrew had spent days agonizing over what might bring his son some joy. Toys, gadgets, expensive trips, none of it had worked. That morning, he'd given Sam several rare books, tracked down through collectors, but there was no sparkle in the boy's eyes. "Dad, I'm 12 now," Sam said quietly. "I'll never walk again, right?" "Don't say that," Andrew said, kneeling in front of him. "We're going to try another course of therapy. There's always something else." "Nothing's going to help anymore," Sam replied, turning to look out the window. That ended the conversation. Andrew left the room feeling crushed. It was unbearable to see his son slipping further into despair. And that's when he had the idea. The day before, Andrew had noticed the girl near his office building, small and pale in an old jacket. She was singing a song about her mother. Her voice was clear and tender, and beside her stood a small cardboard box for spare change. He had seen her several times before. She was too young to be facing that kind of hardship, but something about her struck him deeply. He stopped to talk to her. "What's your name?" "Lizzie," she answered, looking up at him with large green eyes. "Where's your mom?" "She lives not far from here," the girl replied. "I don't have a dad." The conversation was short. Andrew offered to take her to his home to help him with something. He explained he had a son who could really use some company. Lizzie immediately called her mom to ask for permission. Her mother, Susan, was confused at first, but after speaking with Andrew on the phone, getting his address, full name, and verifying the details, she agreed, especially since he said it would only be for the evening. Before heading to the estate, Andrew took Lizzie to a store and bought her some new clothes. She quickly opened up. Her eyes lit up with curiosity when she first saw the mansion, the garden with the fountains, and the luxurious interiors. "This is where you'll meet my son," he told her as they approached Sam's room. Sam was sitting by the window, staring blankly at the wet path in the garden where autumn dew still glistened under weak sunlight. His thin fingers rested on the armrests of his wheelchair, gripping slightly, his way of managing anxiety. Feeling cut off from the world had become normal for him. The sound of the door opening made him turn his head. His father stood there with a girl beside him. Her big eyes studied the room with curiosity but no fear. "Sam, this is Lizzie," Andrew announced, stepping into the room. His voice was firm but carried a subtle tension. "Lizzie, this is my son." Sam gave a cautious nod, studying her warily. Strangers frightened him, but this girl didn't seem threatening. In her hands, she held an old, worn-out stuffed bear, clearly a companion through many tough days. "Hi," Lizzie said cheerfully, lips curled into a small smile. Sam said nothing. He looked down, as if embarrassed by her presence. Andrew gently squeezed his son's shoulder, urging him to look at her. "Lizzie's going to stay with us for a bit. She's special. I think you two will enjoy each other's company." Sam shot his father a glance full of doubt, then turned away again. "I don't need friends," he whispered. Andrew frowned. He looked like he wanted to respond, but thought better of it. Instead, he bent toward Lizzie and whispered, "Just hang out with him. Talk to him. I think he'll like you." After Andrew left, the room filled with an awkward silence. Lizzie shifted from foot to foot, then, as if making up her mind, walked over to the bookshelf. Her eyes ran across the titles until they landed on a thick encyclopedia. "You read these?" she asked, amazed as she pulled one off the shelf. "Sometimes," Sam replied quietly, still avoiding eye contact. Lizzie came closer, sat on a small ottoman near his chair, and opened the book. "Let's see. Oh wow, dinosaurs. They have the weirdest names, like Triceratops. Or is it pronounced different?" Sam couldn't help but let out a small laugh. "Triceratops," he corrected her, almost in a whisper. "No way you actually know this stuff." Lizzie beamed, like she'd just uncovered a hidden treasure. This time Sam almost smiled. She kept flipping through pages, asking more questions. The awkwardness between them began to dissolve, and by the end of the hour, the room echoed with their laughter. When Lizzie was very young, her mom used to tell her bedtime stories, full of magic and wonder, but they always ended with the same words. "Remember, sweetie, everyone has their own kind of strength. The key is finding it inside yourself." Those words had become a sort of mantra for the girl. After her father passed away, and she and her mom were left alone, Lizzie did her best to be strong. She saw how hard her mother worked every day just to get by. That's when Lizzie decided she could help in her own way. She found an old box in the closet, filled it with toys she no longer played with, and went out onto the street, hoping to bring in a little money. But people were more likely to give her change when she sang. That's how the idea started. When Andrew found her, she had just finished singing her favorite song about her mom, and passers-by were tossing coins into the box. Lizzie gave him the kind of honest but cautious smile she had learned to use with adults. Most asked annoying questions, but this man felt different. That evening, Andrew watched as the two children had dinner together. The housekeeper, Nina, served their meal directly in the kids' room, Andrew's idea to help Sam feel more at ease. Lizzie seemed to have settled in completely. She chatted about all sorts of things, waving her hands as she spoke, while Sam, for the first time in ages, not only listened, but replied. His answers were short, but there was life in his voice. When Lizzie fell asleep in the guest room, curled under a warm blanket, Andrew stepped in quietly and tucked her in. She looked so small, so fragile. but there was something incredibly strong about her too. He caught himself wondering, maybe she really could help his son. Later that night, Susan arrived to pick up her daughter, but Lizzie was fast asleep. She didn't have the heart to wake her. Out in the grand hallway, Susan found Andrew standing by the fireplace with a mug of tea in hand. "This house," she said, glancing around. "It's like something out of a fairy tale. I've never seen anything like it." Andrew only shrugged. "I built it for my son, to try to make his life a little happier." His words, full of quiet pain, caught her off guard. She had expected a cold, distant man, but instead, she saw a father trying his hardest to be what his child needed. "If you want, you can stay the night," Andrew offered after a pause. "It's late, and it seems like Lizzie doesn't want to leave just yet." Susan hesitated, but the look on the children's faces, especially Sam's, convinced her. She nodded. She was shown to a cozy guest room, and as she lay in the silence, she couldn't stop thinking about the feeling in that house. Beneath all the elegance, she sensed a deep wound, one that lived in every glance Andrew gave his son. The next morning, she kissed her daughter goodbye and left for work. But later, something unexpected happened. The housekeeper discovered that Lizzie's room was empty. The bed was neatly made, her things untouched, but she was gone. Sam's room was also vacant. Andrew immediately searched the entire house. No one had seen the children leave. But out on the lawn beneath Sam's window, the grass was pressed down, as if wheelchair wheels had rolled through. He inspected the yard and found the back gate leading to the nearby forest park slightly ajar. "How could I be such an idiot?" Andrew muttered, clenching his fists. Panic surged through him. He called security and ordered them to search the area. What if something happened to them? What if Lizzie? Had he made a mistake? Thoughts swirled in his head like a storm. He remembered his wife, how he had lost her, how he had promised himself that nothing like that would ever happen again. But now, that same helpless fear gripped him once more. Andrew paced in his office, breath ragged, palms slick with sweat. Dread hung over him like a shadow. Where could they have gone? He knew Lizzie was clever, thoughtful, but her impulsiveness frightened him. And Sam couldn't even walk. "How could I screw this up so badly?" he whispered to himself. The door burst open. "Mr. Carter," it was Nina, breathless from running. "They're back." Andrew rushed to the foyer. There, by the front door, sat Sam in his wheelchair, and beside him stood Lizzie. Behind them was Susan, her face tired but kind. "Sam." Andrew dropped to his knees beside his son. "You're alive? Are you okay?" "Dad, chill." "I'm fine," Sam muttered, wincing slightly. But there was a warmth in his eyes that hadn't been there in a long time. Andrew exhaled deeply in relief. Susan explained that since she lived nearby, she had found the kids at her apartment. Apparently, Lizzie had told Sam all about the old books they had at home and about her mom's famous apple fritters. The stories had sparked something in Sam, a curiosity Andrew hadn't seen in him in years. "Dad," Sam interrupted, "we were just walking. Lizzie wanted to show me how pretty it is at night, and then I wanted to see their library." "Walking?" Andrew sighed. "Did you even think about how worried I'd be?" Sam frowned but didn't answer. Lizzie lowered her head, guilty, then suddenly spoke. "Please forgive us." Her voice was soft but steady. "It was my idea. I wanted Sam to see that there's something good outside these walls." Andrew felt his anger melting away. This girl genuinely cared about his son. Later, after the children went off to have a snack, Andrew and Susan sat together in the living room. She told him more about her life, how she'd raised Lizzie alone after her husband died in a car crash, how she'd juggled multiple jobs just to make ends meet, how Lizzie had become too independent for her age. "I'm proud of her," she said with a sad smile. "But sometimes her decisions scare me." Andrew listened silently, but his thoughts were racing. This woman, despite everything, had managed to keep her light. She was everything he was not. "You have an incredible daughter," he finally said. Susan smiled. "And your Sam is an amazing boy. I can see how much he needs connection. He's so smart, so thoughtful. I truly believe he can overcome his fears." Andrew fell into thought. Her words stuck with him. Later that night, as Susan and Lizzie were preparing to head home, the kids suddenly began pleading. "Mom, please, can we stay just a little longer? It's so nice here. And tomorrow's a weekend." Lizzie tugged at her mom's sleeve, her eyes wide with hope. "We can't, sweetie. We've already stayed too long," Susan replied wearily. But Andrew stepped in. "Susan, stay. The kids clearly get along, and I think you deserve a break." Susan hesitated, but seeing the joy on the children's faces, especially Sam's, she finally agreed. That night, Andrew sat alone in his study, thinking about his conversation with Susan. He remembered how proud he used to be of his iron will, his ability to control everything. But his wife's death had changed him, made him cold, harsh even with himself. He often blamed himself for not being there that terrible night, for not protecting his family. And even though he had found the men responsible and avenged his wife, it hadn't brought her back. It hadn't brought peace. But now, watching Sam, he was beginning to understand. His son didn't need money or a luxurious home. He needed warmth, real connection, and maybe Lizzie and Susan could give him that better than Andrew ever could. The next day, Andrew woke to find the kids already in the garden, deep into an adventure of their own making. They'd planned a picnic, chatted about books, and Lizzie had even convinced Sam to try throwing a ball. Andrew watched them from a distance and caught himself smiling. "Susan," he said as she stepped outside with a coffee cup, "I've never seen Sam like this." She looked over at the boy, skillfully maneuvering his wheelchair as he played with Lizzie, and smiled. "I think Lizzie senses his pain. She's been through a lot herself. Maybe that helps her understand others." Andrew nodded. A plan was already forming in his mind. He wasn't going to let these two be separated. Susan woke up early, while the house was still wrapped in silence. The soft scent of freshly brewed coffee drifted from the kitchen, and the first rays of sunlight streamed in through the large living room windows. She still wasn't used to the elegance of this place. Every glass pane, every object seemed to whisper its own story. She stepped outside into the garden where dewdrops sparkled on the grass. Her thoughts drifted back to her daughter and the hardships they'd endured. The loss of her husband, the constant struggle to make ends meet. Those years had shaped her into a woman who relied only on herself. But today, watching Lizzie, she felt for the first time in years that her daughter might have a real shot at childhood. "Can't sleep?" Andrew's voice startled her. He stood a few feet away, dressed in a tracksuit holding a mug of tea. "No," Susan replied, turning toward him. "In your house. It's almost too quiet." Andrew gave a dry smile. Silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it just reminds you of everything you've lost. His words were blunt, but Susan didn't take them as a rebuke. "More like pain," she agreed, unsure what else to say. "Your son is extraordinary," she added after a moment. "It's like he has a whole world inside him, but he's afraid to let it out." Andrew lowered his gaze. "I know. I'm just scared he'll stay that way forever." Susan was about to reply, but Lizzie's joyful voice interrupted her. "Mom, we just came up with a new adventure." The children burst into the garden. Lizzie was practically pulling Sam's wheelchair along, his face lit up with rare happiness. "Dad, can we? We want to put together a mini exhibit in the library," Sam exclaimed. "Lizzie found some old books, and I'm going to help organize it." Andrew looked at his son, so alive, so animated. It was such a rare sight that he immediately agreed. "Of course. Just be careful, all right?" The kids vanished, chattering about their plans, and Susan smiled. "I don't know how she does it, but Lizzie is really changing him." Andrew nodded. "It's not just that she helps him. She's giving him hope. Hope that the world can still be good." Later, in the library, the room was a whirlwind of activity. Lizzie and Sam animatedly discussed how to arrange the books, what themes to choose. Andrew stood in the doorway, watching quietly. His heart tightened with sudden clarity. He couldn't remember the last time Sam had laughed like that, but the more he watched his son, the more he remembered that night, the night he lost his wife. He hadn't been there, and now the fear of losing someone again gripped him like a vice. "It'll be okay," came Susan's voice behind him. She had entered silently, but her words were firm. Andrew turned to her. "What if it's not? I lost my wife. What if I lose my son, too?" Susan studied him for a moment, then gently laid a hand on his arm. "You won't lose him. You're everything to him. He just needs you to believe in him, to believe in himself." Andrew's mind flashed back to a meeting he'd had with a rehabilitation specialist a few months earlier. The doctor had explained, "Medically, your son's legs are fine," he said, twisting a pen between his fingers, "but he's become so used to feeling powerless that his mind refuses to believe he can walk." "So it's his fault?" Andrew had asked sharply, anger bubbling up. "Not exactly. It's psychological trauma, and sometimes even years of therapy don't break through that." Those words had hit him harder than he'd admitted. He had blamed himself, believing it was his own failure that Sam hadn't recovered. The library exhibit turned into a real celebration. Lizzie proudly showed Susan the books she and Sam had selected, and Sam explained how they'd arranged each section. He spoke with enthusiasm, pointing to handwritten labels and decorated corners they had made together. But the joy didn't stop there. That evening, after Lizzie begged them to visit the indoor pool, Susan noticed something astonishing. Sam, for the first time, tried to swim. "You're amazing, Sam!" Lizzie shouted, clapping her hands from the edge. Susan saw Andrew turn away, clearly trying to hide his emotions. "It's Lizzie," he said softly. "She's pulling him out of the shadows." "It's not just her," Susan replied. "Sam wants to change, and you've helped too." But happiness, it seemed, would be short-lived. The next day, Lizzie started coughing. At first, everyone assumed it was a mild cold, but Susan soon noticed how rapidly her daughter's condition was deteriorating. "Was it the pool?" Andrew asked, concerned, as Susan called the doctor. "No." She shook her head. "She has a weak immune system. She was premature, and after her father passed, we went through a lot." Andrew noticed her hands trembling as she wrapped Lizzie in a blanket. "It'll be all right," he said, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. But within a few days, Lizzie was in the hospital. She lay in a sterile bed, barely able to lift her head to look out the window. The golden autumn sunlight that once seemed so warm now felt distant and unreachable. The scent of antiseptic clung to everything. Susan sat at her bedside, holding her tiny hand. "Mom, are you crying?" Lizzie asked softly, trying to smile. "Of course not," Susan said quickly, looking away. But Lizzie knew better. She squinted, trying to keep her mother in focus, and whispered, "Mommy, it's going to be okay. I'm strong, right?" The words sliced through Susan's heart like a blade. She remembered how many times she'd told Lizzie that strength was the most important thing. But now, in this moment, she didn't feel strong at all. Andrew appeared in the doorway holding a bouquet of white chrysanthemums. His face was tight with emotion. He nodded silently to Susan, then walked to the bed. "Hey, Red," he said, trying to smile. Lizzie giggled weakly, but the giggle turned into a cough. Susan leaned forward in concern, but Lizzie waved her hand, signaling she was fine. "Why'd you bring flowers? They'll just wilt here," she muttered with a grin. "You should have brought a book instead." Andrew sat down beside her, placing the flowers on the nightstand. "A book will come next time, but today I want to tell you a story." Lizzie looked at him, her eyes still full of that faint but glowing spark. Andrew began to recount an old legend he once read to Sam, a story about a knight who, despite his fears, found the strength to fight for his family. "What happened to him?" Lizzie asked when he finished. "He won," Andrew said firmly, looking her in the eyes. "And you will too." Susan quietly stepped out of the room, not wanting Lizzie to see her crying again. Back at home, Sam sat in his room staring at pictures on his tablet. Photo after photo showed him and Lizzie, at the library, in the pool, in the garden. She was laughing in all of them. He played them over and over, a knot growing in his chest. Why can't I do anything? He murmured to no one in particular. Then something inside him shifted. A thought, more like a jolt, hit him. He had to try to walk, not for himself, for her. Lizzie would tell me I can, he whispered, gripping the armrests of his wheelchair. He pulled himself up slowly, using the desk for support. His legs trembled beneath him, but they held. It was agony, but he was standing. His heart pounded so hard, it felt like it might burst. The next morning, Susan returned home to grab some essentials for the hospital. Andrew offered to drive her. The city streets were quiet, washed in early morning gray, and the inside of the car felt heavy with silence. "She's strong," Susan said finally, breaking the stillness. Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled in her lap. "I know," Andrew replied curtly, eyes fixed on the road. But Susan's fingers clenched. "Sometimes I feel like I'm going to lose her." Andrew abruptly pulled the car to a stop, the tires skidding slightly. He turned to her, and for a moment his normally composed eyes burned with raw pain. "You're not going to lose her," he said, barely above a whisper. But the conviction in his voice made Susan's chest loosen just a bit. Back at the estate, Sam kept trying. He fell often, skinning his knees and elbows, but he got back up every time. His determination was relentless. The only voice in his head was Lizzie's, repeating the things she used to tell him. She had told him that true strength came from within, that you had to fight even when it hurt. On the fourth day, he finally managed to take several steps across the room. Nina, the housekeeper, walked in just as it happened. She froze, eyes wide, then ran from the room, her hands over her mouth. Moments later, Andrew stood at the doorway staring at his son. "Are you sure I'm not dreaming?" he asked, barely daring to believe what he saw. Sam nodded. His eyes shone with something fierce and new. "I'm doing this for Lizzie," he said quietly. "She would have wanted me to try." Andrew felt his chest tighten. He crossed the room, knelt beside his son, and pulled him into a trembling hug, for the first time in a very long time letting emotion take over. But when they arrived at the hospital later that day, the surge of joy was cut short by cold fear. Susan sat at Lizzie's bedside. Her face was pale, expression blank. Lizzie was breathing softly, lips barely moving. "Mommy, don't cry," she whispered. Sam, still unsteady but determined, shuffled forward. He reached out and touched her hand. "I walked, Lizzie," he said, his voice shaking. "Can you believe it? I really did." The girl opened her eyes. She smiled, small, tired, but real. "I knew you would," she whispered. Her fingers gently squeezed his. Then they slipped away. Susan covered her face with both hands. Andrew stood there, silent, feeling his heart split open. Lizzie's funeral took place on a cold, gray autumn day. A light rain turned the ground into soft mud, and the wind rustled the bare trees as if the earth itself mourned her passing. The cemetery was quiet. The only sound was the soft tapping of raindrops on black umbrellas. Susan stood by the small grave, barely able to stay upright. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, as if all her tears had already been spent. Andrew stood beside her, holding her by the elbow so she wouldn't fall, though he himself felt as if his knees might give out at any moment. Sam was there too. No wheelchair. He leaned gently against his father, making slow but steady steps. His face was calm, but his eyes brimmed with grief, far too heavy for a 12-year-old boy. "She wouldn't want us to be sad," he said quietly, looking down at the headstone where the name Elizabeth Vaughn was etched in smooth gray granite. "She gave light, even in the darkest nights." Susan took in a shaky breath but said nothing. Her lips trembled, but no words came out. Andrew looked at her. "You still have to be strong," he said softly. "For her." Susan shook her head. "She was my whole life. Now." Her voice cracked. "Now there's nothing left." Andrew placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "There are memories and everything she gave to us." Susan let out a quiet sob but nodded. Her body sagged slightly under the weight of grief, but she stayed standing. After the funeral, Susan disappeared from the public eye. She returned to her modest apartment to work, to the quiet routine of a life suddenly dimmed. Each day felt like it bled into the next, gray and directionless. Only in the evenings, when she sorted through Lizzie's old things, did she find the strength to remember and to smile. One night, digging through a box of her daughter's drawings, she found a folded piece of paper. It was one of Lizzie's final notes. "Mommy, you always told me to be strong. I tried. Now you have to try too. I love you." The words etched themselves into Susan's heart. She broke down, but this time the tears weren't hopeless. They were part of letting go, part of beginning to accept. Sam changed too. He still had a long road ahead of him, but he no longer avoided the world. He kept walking, clumsily, slowly, but with unshakable determination. Andrew brought in the best therapists, but the drive came from Sam himself. Everything he did now, he did for Lizzie. One afternoon, sitting at his desk, Sam opened a book they had read together. Tucked between the pages was a small piece of paper, a message written in Lizzie's looping, uneven handwriting. "Sam, you're the bravest boy I've ever met. I believe you can do anything you dream of. Just don't give up." He read the note over and over, then gently folded it back into the book. "I won't let you down, Lizzie," he whispered, eyes turned toward the stars outside his window. She remained with them, in their hearts, in their memories, in every step Sam took, like a lighthouse guiding them through the darkest nights. And in each new day, in every small victory, they still felt her presence. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts about this story in the comments. Don't forget to hit the bell so you never miss a new video. See you next time, dear listeners.